Okay, so we have 3 jazz groups here at the high school. This is our jazz ensemble. They meet 0 period because in a 6-period day, there's not enough room for 2 periods of jazz unless you're a freshman. So to be an upperclassman here, that means a sophomore, junior, or senior. To continue in the jazz program, it does require you to extend your day by either being part of our 0 period or a 7th period group. I've always been very protective over the jazz program and really wanting to keep it intact, which is why my teaching schedule extends also outside the normal 6-period day, because I feel that this is very important. Jazz is important, and as you can see, we have about 100 students in our jazz program, which is a lot of students in 3 jazz bands. So it's just I feel very grateful. I want to work with these performers, and so this is our jazz ensemble. This is the group that does a lot of our when we do have special events and things, like we just were invited to for the 2nd year to perform at LMC's graduation. We did a fall special event, and so we're ready to get things started, kicking off with the swing chart titled Red Zone. We heard from them was Joaquin on Mary sax, Sadie on alto sax, Zadrian on trombone, and in this next tune titled I Remember Clifford, this is a ballad that's going to be featuring Miles on trumpet. Flugelhorn, Miles on flugelhorn. for our performance set. We heard from Jalissa on tenor sax, and just in general, our rhythm section over here, having to hold it down in a chart like that, you know, pretty solid job over on this side. So we're going to close out this performance set with Jazz Ensemble, but before we do that, I want to point out who our senior members are. So starting from the trumpet section, we have Miles on trumpet and Noel up at the top. In our trombone section, we have Zadrian, and then wave, did you guys wave back there so that they know? And we have saxes up front, Sadie on alto, and Jalissa on tenor sax, and then in rhythm section we have Marissa on drums. So really, and Elizabeth on vibes, who's also doing auxiliary percussion on that last number. So everybody, round of applause for all of our senior members. And many of these senior member names that I just called out they are not only 4-year members in our marching program, but they are also 4-year jazz members. So that means they started jazz their freshman year and stuck with jazz all 4 years in high school, which, really appreciate, I appreciate all these jazz students, I can't say it enough. So we're gonna close out our set with a tune titled Whiplash. So if you've been feeling pretty comfortable in a 4/4 time zone, this is not your chart because it's gonna take you all over the place. So hope you enjoy this one. This is Whiplash. Okay, everyone, we hope you enjoyed our Pittsburgh High School jazz concert, but we have a special guest tonight, so we're just gonna get them set up on this stage, and you're in for a real treat. So looking forward to bringing them up here, and yeah, give us a moment. Thank you.